My name is Sarah. I live in Texas, USA, and I am 63 years old. Before I go into this story, please make sure you subscribe, like this video, and click on the notification button so you don't miss any of my upcoming interesting stories. And also, tell me in the comments which part of the country you are watching from. Now let me take you straight into the most painful part of my life. I still remember the night my uncle stood over me with his face twisted in anger. He pointed his finger right at my face and whispered, "If you tell your father what I did, I will destroy you. I will tear your life apart piece by piece." His words were sharp like knives, and his eyes carried a darkness I had never seen before. At that moment I felt my whole body freeze. My chest tightened, my breath caught in my throat, and my world collapsed into silence. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but fear locked my lips. And do you know the most shocking part? That wasn't the first time. It had already happened many times before, and it was only getting worse. But how did I end up in this nightmare? Let me take you back to the very beginning. I grew up in a small town where everybody knew each other. Life was simple. We had one main street, two grocery stores, a church, and a school where all the children of the town gathered. My father was a hardworking man who believed that family came first. He trusted his brothers more than anything, and among those brothers was Uncle James. Uncle James was the one everyone loved. He was charming, funny, and always had a smile ready for the neighbors. People said, "If you need help, call James. He'll be there." To the world he was a hero. But behind closed doors he was someone else. Someone I wish I had never known. When I was just a little girl, my father often asked Uncle James to watch over me whenever he was busy with work. "She's safe with James," my father would say. Safe. That word still burns in my memory because safe was the last thing I ever was. At first, everything seemed normal. Uncle James would bring me candy, tell me stories, and make me laugh until my stomach hurt. I thought he was the best uncle in the world. But slowly, little by little, the mask he wore started to slip. He became controlling. He would ask me to keep secrets from my dad. Harmless secrets at first, like skipping chores or sneaking cookies. But those secrets grew darker. I didn't know it then, but he was testing me. Testing how far he could push me. And each time I stayed quiet, he went further. One evening when I was 9 years old, I remember sitting on the porch with my doll in my lap. Uncle James leaned down close to me and said, "You're my favorite, Sarah. But if you ever tell anyone the things I do, I will make sure your father hates you forever." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but the threat behind it was as real as fire. From that day, fear became my shadow. At school, I smiled and played like every other child. But inside, I carried a heavy secret. Nobody knew. Not my friends, not my teachers, not even my father who loved me more than life itself. I wanted to tell, but every time I opened my mouth, I remembered Uncle James's eyes. The way they glowed with anger when he said he would destroy me. The secret grew inside me like a storm waiting to break. Then came the night that changed everything. I was lying in bed when I heard the door creak open. My heart started pounding because I knew exactly who it was. Uncle James stepped into the room, his shadow stretching across the floor, and whispered, "Remember what I told you. If you open your mouth, I will tear your world apart." And that's when something happened that I can never forget. My heart raced so fast that night I thought it would burst right out of my chest. Uncle James's shadow stretched long across my bedroom floor, swallowing me whole. His words echoed inside my head like a curse. "Remember what I told you. If you open your mouth, I will tear your world apart." I clutched the edge of my blanket and pretended to be asleep. My little body trembled under the covers, every muscle tight as a knot. I hoped if I stayed still enough, quiet enough, he would leave. But Uncle James never left easily. He stood there, watching me, breathing heavy in the darkness. I could feel his eyes on me, piercing through my closed eyelids. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I couldn't tell. But at last, the door clicked shut. I lay frozen until the first light of dawn crept through my window. Only then did I dare to breathe again. Only then did I let the tears fall. That morning, I went to school like nothing had happened. I wore my best dress, smiled at my friends, and laughed when the teacher made a silly joke. But inside, I was drowning. I carried a heavy stone of fear in my chest that nobody could see. The days that followed became a blur of pretending. I became an expert at hiding. hiding my shaking hands, my sleepless nights, my jump whenever the door creaked. Uncle James had built a prison around me, not with walls or bars but with fear. And I was his prisoner. But let me tell you something. Secrets never stay buried forever. They fester. They rot. And sooner or later they demand to be seen. One Saturday afternoon, I was helping my father fix the fence behind our house. The sun was hot, the air smelled of freshly cut grass, and for the first time in a long time, I felt almost normal. My father wiped sweat from his brow and said, "Sarah, you're growing strong like your old man. Soon you'll be fixing fences without me." I smiled. I wanted to tell him everything right then and there. The words sat on the tip of my tongue, but before I could open my mouth, I saw Uncle James walking across the yard toward us. My blood ran cold. He wore his usual wide grin, waving at my father as if nothing in the world was wrong. "Brother," he called out, "need an extra hand?" My father's face lit up. Of course. Sarah and I could use all the help we can get. And just like that, the moment was gone. My chance to speak had slipped through my fingers like sand. I lowered my eyes, swallowed my words, and hammered another nail into the fence. That was how it always went. Uncle James knew exactly when to appear, exactly how to silence me without ever laying a hand in front of others. He was clever. Too clever. The following weeks only got worse. He began controlling my every move. If I wanted to play with friends, he was there. If I tried to be alone with my father, he appeared. He made sure I never had the space to tell anyone the truth. And each time he whispered his threats, they grew darker. One evening, he leaned close to my ear and said, "If you tell your dad, I'll make sure he never believes you. I'll turn him against you. Do you want that, Sarah? Do you want your father to hate you?" That broke me. My father's love was the one thing I clung to in the storm. Losing it felt worse than death. So I stayed silent. But silence doesn't erase pain. It only makes it louder inside your heart. I began having nightmares almost every night. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. My father would rush to my room, hold me tight, and ask, "What's wrong, baby? Tell me what's wrong." And do you know what I said? I said, "Nothing, Daddy. Just a bad dream." Elite. Over and over again. Because the fear of Uncle James's threats outweighed the safety of my father's arms. At school, teachers began noticing I was different. I wasn't the cheerful girl I used to be. I no longer raised my hand in class, no longer ran freely during recess. I was quiet, withdrawn. My best friend, Emily, even asked me one day, "Sarah, why don't you laugh anymore? Did I do something wrong?" I wanted to tell her. I wanted to tell somebody, anybody, but the words stuck like glue in my throat. Then one day, something happened that nearly exposed the secret. It was my 10th birthday. My father had invited all the neighbors, and the backyard was filled with laughter, balloons, and the smell of barbecue. For a few hours, I felt happy again. Surrounded by friends and family. I almost forgot the nightmare that haunted me. I was opening presents when Uncle James placed a small box in front of me. "For my favorite niece," he said with that same fake smile. Everyone clapped as I tore off the wrapping. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, shining in the sunlight. To everyone else, it was a sweet gift. But to me it was a chain. Uncle James leaned down close and whispered so only I could hear, "This means you're mine. Don't ever forget it." I froze. My father clapped his brother on the back and said, "You always spoil her, James." The crowd laughed, not knowing the storm raging inside me. That night, after the party ended, I sat on my bed staring at the bracelet. It glittered under the moonlight, mocking me. I wanted to throw it out the window, but fear stopped me. What if he found out? What if he punished me for rejecting his gift? The bracelet stayed on my dresser, a constant reminder of the prison I was in. Weeks turned into months, and my silence grew heavier. I felt like I was walking with a shadow that no one else could see. My father kept trusting his brother, and the more he trusted him, the more trapped I felt. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled across the sky, Uncle James came to our house again. My father wasn't home. It was just me and him. The door creaked as he stepped into the living room, rain dripping from his coat. His smile was gone this time. His eyes were dark, sharp, dangerous. He looked straight at me and said, "You think you can hide from me? You think anyone will believe you over me? I own this family, Sarah. Don't forget it." And then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made my blood run cold. The moment Uncle James reached into his pocket, my whole body froze. My hands went clammy, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. He pulled out a small pocket knife. Its silver blade glistened in the dim light of the living room, catching the flashes of lightning outside the window. I gasped. He twirled the knife in his fingers casually, like it was a toy, but his eyes never left mine. He leaned forward, the blade pointing at me, and whispered, "Do you see this, Sarah? This is what happens if you ever try to open your mouth." The room felt smaller, darker, like the walls themselves were closing in. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was locked tight with fear. After what felt like forever, he folded the knife, slid it back into his pocket, and smirked. "Good girl," he said softly. Then he turned and walked out into the storm, leaving the door wide open behind him. Rain blew into the room, soaking the floor, but I was too shaken to move. When my father came home later, he saw the wet floor and asked, "Sarah, what happened here?" I stared at him, trembling, but the words wouldn't come. "Nothing," I whispered. "The wind must have blown it open." He looked at me for a long moment, as though he sensed something was wrong, but then he sighed and closed the door. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the thunder fade into silence. The image of the knife haunted me. I realized then that Uncle James wasn't just threatening me with words anymore. He was ready to use violence if I disobeyed. From that day I carried two fears: the fear of being exposed and the fear of being hurt. But life has a strange way of mixing pain with ordinary days. In the mornings I still went to school. I still walked down Main Street with Emily, still recited poems in class, still ate lunch with the other children. On the surface nothing had changed, but inside I was breaking. Emily started noticing more. One day she grabbed my hand and whispered, "Sarah, you're always so jumpy. Did someone hurt you?" Her words almost cracked me open. I wanted so badly to tell her everything. My lips parted, but before I could speak, I saw Uncle James's face in my mind, his smirk, his knife. The words died on my tongue. "No, primelit. I'm just tired." She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. At home, my father remained blind to the truth. He trusted his brother more than anyone. Sometimes I even wondered if Uncle James knew how much I wanted to tell, and that's why he made sure to stay close, to always appear just when I was about to open up. One evening, a few weeks after the knife incident, my father announced, "Sarah, your uncle is going to be staying with us for a while. His house needs some repairs." The blood drained from my face. "What?" I stammered. "Don't worry," my father said cheerfully. "It'll be good having family around. He'll help with chores, and you'll have company when I'm at work." Company. That word felt like poison. From then on, Uncle James became a permanent shadow in our house. I couldn't escape him. He was in the kitchen when I made breakfast, in the living room when I did my homework, even in the hallway when I went to bed. His presence was constant, suffocating. But here's the thing. Evil men like him can't hide forever. Sometimes they slip. Sometimes they reveal too much. One Saturday afternoon, my father asked Uncle James to fix the back shed while we went into town for groceries. I begged my father to let me come along, but Uncle James quickly said, "Don't worry, she can help me here." My father nodded without suspicion and drove off. As soon as his truck disappeared, Uncle James turned to me with that cruel grin. "You're trapped, Sarah. You'll always be trapped." I clenched my fists, fighting back tears. "Why are you doing this to me?" I whispered. His grin widened. "Because I can." Those 3 words burned into me like fire. While he worked on the shed, I stood near the door, staring at the road, silently praying my father would return soon. That's when something unexpected happened. A neighbor, old Mrs. Carter, walked by with her dog. She waved and called out, "Sarah, sweetheart. How are you?" I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, Uncle James stepped forward and wrapped his arm around my shoulders, squeezing tight. "She's fine," he said quickly. "Aren't you, Sarah?" I nodded, forcing a smile, though my heart screamed for help. Mrs. Carter tilted her head, frowning slightly. For a moment I thought she saw through the act. But then she simply smiled back and walked on. My chance was gone. That night, Uncle James leaned close and hissed in my ear. "You even think of calling out for help again and you'll regret it." My hope sank deeper into darkness. But remember what I told you earlier, secrets rot. And soon, mine began to leak through the cracks. At school, I started drawing pictures during art class. Dark pictures. Storms, cages, and shadows with knives. My teacher, Mrs. Miller, noticed. She pulled me aside one afternoon and said gently, "Sarah, are you okay? You know you can talk to me if something is bothering you." Her voice was kind, her eyes full of concern. For a second, I almost told her. My throat ached with the truth pressing to come out. But then I remembered Uncle James's knife, his threats, and the fear swallowed me whole again. "Yes, I'm fine," I lied. Mrs. Miller didn't look convinced, but she let it go. The pressure inside me grew heavier each day. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The shadows of fear followed me everywhere. And then one night, something happened that shook everything. I was lying in bed when I heard voices in the kitchen. My father and Uncle James were talking. Their voices were low, but the walls were thin. I crept out of bed and pressed my ear to the door. "James," my father said, "I need you to be careful with Sarah. She's been acting strange lately. I don't know what's wrong, but I trust you to look after her." Uncle James chuckled, his voice calm and smooth. "Of course, brother. You know I'd never let anything happen to her." My stomach churned. The way he twisted the truth so easily, the way my father believed him, it broke something inside me. But then I heard something else. My father's voice dropped lower. "I've been saving some money, James. Enough to finally fix the farm. I'll keep it in the shed until I can take it to the bank." There was silence, then Uncle James said softly, "That's good to know." My blood ran cold. For the first time, I realized Uncle James wasn't just dangerous to me. He was dangerous to my father too. His eyes weren't only on me. He was after more. The next morning, I watched him closely. Every smile, every laugh, every word he spoke to my father. It was all a mask. Behind it, I saw greed. I saw hunger. And I knew then that if I didn't find a way to stop him, he would destroy us both. That evening, I gathered every ounce of courage I had. I decided I would tell my father the truth, no matter what Uncle James said, no matter the knife, no matter the threats. I waited until after dinner, when my father sat in his chair reading the newspaper. I walked up to him, my hands trembling, and whispered, "Daddy, I need to tell you something about Uncle James." He looked up, surprised. "What is it, Sarah?" My heart pounded. I opened my mouth, ready to speak, when suddenly the front door burst open. Uncle James stood there, his face pale, his eyes wild. In his hands, he carried something that made both me and my father jump to our feet. The front door slammed against the wall as Uncle James stormed in. His eyes darted around wildly, and in his hands he held a small brown sack. The fabric was damp from the rain outside, but the way he gripped it told me it was heavy. Very heavy. My father frowned and stood up. "James, what's going on? What are you carrying?" Uncle James shut the door with his foot, breathing hard. "Nothing," he snapped quickly, clutching the sack tighter. His voice cracked slightly, betraying nerves. But I wasn't fooled. I knew that sack wasn't nothing. I could see the faint outline of metal through the soaked fabric. It looked like tools, or maybe something worse. My father stepped closer. "You're acting strange. What's in the bag?" Uncle James forced a smile, but it was thin and shaky. "Just some things from the shed," he said. "Don't worry about it." I watched in silence, my hands trembling at my sides. Every instinct screamed that he was hiding something. My father tilted his head, suspicious now. "From the shed? That's where I've been keeping some money for the repairs. James, did you take it?" The room went dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Uncle James's smile vanished. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw the mask fall away. The friendly uncle, the helpful brother, it was all gone. In its place was coldness. "Don't accuse me," he hissed. "I've done nothing but help you." My father took a step forward. "Then show me what's in the bag." Uncle James's grip on the sack tightened until his knuckles turned white. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp and threatening, as if to remind me of his warning. I froze, unable to breathe. "I don't have to show you anything," he said firmly. "You trust me, don't you?" Uncle James leaned over the table, his face close to my father's. His voice dropped low and dangerous. "Don't push me, brother. Some things are better left alone." My father's hands curled into fists. "Are you threatening me in my own house?" The air in the room grew thick, so heavy it was hard to breathe. I knew in that moment that something terrible was about to happen, because Uncle James reached into the sack, his hand closing around something inside. And when he pulled it out, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My father hesitated, torn between trust and doubt. I could see the conflict in his eyes. And that's when I realized something. I had a choice. I could stay silent like I always did, or I could speak now and risk everything. The words built inside my chest, pushing against my throat. My father's eyes moved from James to me, almost as if he sensed the truth hiding in me. "Sarah," he said slowly, "is there something you're not telling me?" My mouth opened, but before a sound came out, Uncle James slammed the sack down on the table with a thud so loud it made me jump. Something metallic clanged inside. My father's eyes widened. "What is that?" When Uncle James pulled his hand out of the sack, the room went silent. In his grip was a shiny revolver. The metal glinted under the dim light, and my heart almost stopped. My father froze where he stood. His voice was low but steady. "James, what are you doing with a gun?" Uncle James smirked, spinning the weapon in his hand like he had practiced with it before. "Protection," he said casually. "The world is dangerous. You never know when you'll need one." But the way he said it, the way his eyes locked onto my father, it didn't sound like protection at all. It sounded like a threat. My knees shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the chair to stay upright. I thought about the knife he had shown me before, and now this gun. His threats were no longer just words. He had the power to carry them out. My father raised his hand slightly, not in fear but in caution. "James, put it away. We don't keep weapons in this house. You know that." Uncle James chuckled. "Maybe you don't. But me? I don't take chances. And maybe you shouldn't either, brother." The tension in the room was so thick I could hardly breathe. Every second felt like an hour. I expected the gun to go off at any moment. Finally, after what felt like forever, Uncle James slipped the revolver back into the sack and tied it shut. "Relax," he said with a grin. "No harm done. I just wanted to make sure you knew I can handle myself." But his grin wasn't playful. It was sharp, dangerous, a warning. That night, after Uncle James went to bed in the guest room, I lay awake listening to the creaks of the old house. My father sat in his chair long after midnight, silent, his brow furrowed. I could tell he was troubled, but he said nothing. And I said nothing too. The silence between us was a wall. And Uncle James stood on the other side, growing stronger every day. The next morning, life went on as if nothing had happened. My father made breakfast, Uncle James acted cheerful, and I forced myself to eat though my stomach churned. But the memory of the gun haunted me. It was proof that Uncle James was no longer just a threat to me. He was a danger to all of us. At school, I drifted through the day like a ghost. My teacher called my name twice before I realized she wanted me to answer a question. Emily, my best friend, squeezed my hand under the desk and whispered, "You're scaring me, Sarah. Please tell me what's wrong." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I can't," I whispered back. But Emily wouldn't give up. After school, she followed me all the way to my street. "If you don't tell me, I'll tell your dad you're keeping secrets," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, it was worried. For a second, I almost gave in. I almost let it all pour out. But then I saw Uncle James waiting by the porch, leaning against the rail, watching us with that same cold grin. My words died instantly. "Go home, Emily," I said softly. Her face fell, but she nodded and walked away. I watched her disappear down the street, wishing I had the courage to call her back. That night, Uncle James cornered me in the hallway. "You almost told her, didn't you?" he hissed. His breath smelled of whiskey. "Don't forget what I showed you last night. One word from you and this whole house comes down." I wanted to scream, to fight, but fear chained me to silence once again. The following days blurred into one another. Uncle James grew bolder. He controlled the conversations at dinner, interrupted whenever I tried to speak, and acted as though he owned the house. My father seemed torn, grateful for his brother's help, but uneasy about his presence. I could see the worry in his eyes, though he tried to hide it. Then one evening everything shifted. My father asked Uncle James to bring firewood from the shed. As soon as he stepped outside, my father leaned close to me and whispered, "Sarah, I know something is wrong. You've been carrying a weight, and I can see it in your eyes. Please tell me the truth." Tears welled up, and my chest ached with the urge to finally release the secret. "Daddy," I began, my voice trembling. But before I could continue, the back door creaked open. Uncle James returned with the firewood, his eyes narrowing as he looked at us. He dropped the logs onto the hearth with a thud and said smoothly, "What are you two whispering about?" My father straightened quickly. "Nothing important," he said, forcing a smile. But I knew Uncle James didn't believe him. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand hovered near the pocket where he kept the gun. That night, I lay awake listening to the storm outside. Rain pounded against the windows, and thunder rolled through the sky. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. My breath caught, and I pulled the blanket up to my chin. The doorknob turned. The door creaked open, and Uncle James stepped inside. His face lit faintly by the lightning flashing through the window. He carried the sack again, the same one that held the gun. He closed the door softly behind him, his eyes locked on me. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice calm but chilling. "You've been thinking about telling, haven't you? I can see it in your face. But let me remind you." He opened the sack slowly, reached inside, and pulled out the revolver. He held it up, the barrel glinting in the stormlight. "This," he said, "is what keeps you quiet." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Fear held me in its grip. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. "And if you ever try to betray me, I won't just use it on you. I'll use it on your father." Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and in that moment I realized the truth. Uncle James wasn't just threatening me anymore. He was threatening the person I loved most in the world. And I knew I had to make a choice. Do I stay silent to protect my father? Or do I risk everything to save us both? Before I could decide, Uncle James shoved the gun back into the sack, gave me one last cold smile, and slipped out of the room. I lay there trembling until morning, knowing my life would never be the same again. And the very next day, something happened that forced my hand, something that changed everything forever. The morning after that stormy night, I woke up with swollen eyes and a pounding heart. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Uncle James's face leaning over me, the revolver gleaming in his hand, and his voice echoing, "If you ever betray me, I'll use it on your father." I dragged myself out of bed, trying to act normal, but inside I was shaking. At breakfast, my father sat at the table drinking his coffee, reading the newspaper. Uncle James sat across from him, humming like nothing had happened, smiling that fake smile. I forced myself to eat a piece of toast though my stomach turned. My father glanced at me and frowned. "You look tired, Sarah. Did you have another nightmare?" I nodded quickly. "Yes, Daddy. Just a nightmare." Uncle James chuckled. "Kids and their dreams," he said, sipping his coffee. But when my father turned the page of the newspaper, Uncle James leaned slightly toward me and mouthed the word "remember." My blood ran cold. That morning set the tone for the day. Uncle James followed me everywhere. When I swept the porch, he leaned on the rail, watching. When I fed the chickens, he stood by the gate, arms crossed. When I tried to sit quietly in my room, he opened the door without knocking, pretending to check if I was all right. I realized then that he wasn't just threatening me anymore. He was guarding me, making sure I didn't find a chance to speak out. By noon, I felt suffocated. I needed air, I needed space. So when my father asked me to run to the corner store for flour, I nearly cried with relief. "Yes, Daddy, I'll go right away," I said. I grabbed my coat and hurried out the door before Uncle James could stop me. For the first time in weeks, I walked alone down the dusty road, breathing in the crisp air. But freedom was a fragile thing. I could still feel his shadow chasing me even though he wasn't there. At the store, I met Mrs. Carter again, the kind neighbor with the little dog. She patted my shoulder warmly. "Sarah dear, you've been looking pale lately. Are you eating enough? Is something bothering you?" Her eyes were so kind, her voice so gentle, that for a moment the words almost tumbled out. "Yes, something is wrong. Terribly wrong. Please help me." But then I saw Uncle James's smirk in my mind, the revolver in his hand, and I swallowed my words. "I'm fine, Mrs. Carter," I whispered. She studied me, unconvinced, but didn't press further. "All right, child. But remember, you can always come to me if you need to talk." I nodded, clutching the bag of flour tightly. When I got home, Uncle James was waiting by the porch. "Took you long enough," he said coldly, his eyes narrowing. "Who did you talk to?" "No one," I whispered, shaking my head. He leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. "Good. Because if I ever find out you've said a word, it won't just be your father I go after. It'll be anyone you talk to. Understand?" I nodded quickly, my throat tight. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. My father worked outside on the fence, and Uncle James pretended to help him. But I knew what he was really doing, watching me, waiting for me to slip. That evening, something happened that forced my hand. My father went to bed early, exhausted from the day's work. I sat quietly in my room, clutching my doll, trying to calm the storm inside me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps again. Heavy, slow, deliberate. The door creaked open, and there he was. Uncle James, holding that same brown sack. My heart dropped. He closed the door behind him, the revolver already in his hand. He twirled it casually, his eyes fixed on me. "Do you know what happens to little girls who can't keep secrets?" he whispered. I froze. "Please don't hurt us," I begged, my voice trembling. He laughed softly, the sound chilling me to the bone. "Then remember, Sarah, silence is your only friend." He raised the gun and pointed it at the wall just beside my head. My breath caught. He pulled the trigger. Click. It was empty. I screamed and covered my ears as he burst into laughter. "Relax, little one. I didn't load it this time." He leaned close, his smile cruel. "But next time? Who knows?" Then he tucked the revolver back into the sack, patted my cheek like I was a child, and walked out, whistling. I collapsed onto my bed, sobbing. That was the moment I knew. This would never end unless I did something. I couldn't keep living like a prisoner in my own house, terrified every second. And I couldn't let him hurt my father. The next morning, I made a decision. I would tell. I didn't care what he threatened. I didn't care what he said. I had to speak, or we'd both be lost. But telling wouldn't be easy. Uncle James never left me alone long enough. And if I tried in front of him, he would silence me before the words even reached my father's ears. So I came up with a plan. At school, I would write everything down. I would put it in a letter. And I would give that letter to someone I trusted, someone who could deliver it to my father if something happened to me. All day, my heart pounded as I thought about the plan. Every time Uncle James's face flashed in my mind, I felt a wave of fear. But fear couldn't rule me anymore. It was time to fight back. That night, as I lay in bed pretending to sleep, I thought about the letter. The words formed in my head, simple but heavy with truth. "Daddy, Uncle James has been threatening me. He has a gun. He says he will hurt you if I tell. Please believe me. Please protect us." I knew the risks. If he found the letter, everything would be over. But if I stayed silent, it would be over anyway. The decision was made. But little did I know, the very next day, something would happen at school that would put my plan, and my entire life, on the line. Because Uncle James followed me. The next morning, I walked to school with the letter already forming in my mind. My hands trembled as I clutched my books. I kept glancing over my shoulder, praying Uncle James wouldn't come after me. But when I reached the schoolyard, my heart sank. There he was, leaning against the fence, pretending to smoke, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his cap. But I knew he was watching me. I swallowed hard and forced myself to walk inside. Kids laughed and played around me, but I felt alone, like I was carrying a secret so heavy it might crush me. I slipped into my classroom, sat at my desk, and waited for the teacher to start the lesson. All through math, my mind raced. When the teacher turned to the blackboard, I slowly slid a piece of paper from my notebook. My hand shook as I wrote, "Daddy, Uncle James has a gun. He's been threatening me. Please, please believe me." My pencil pressed so hard it almost tore the page. I folded the note quickly and tucked it inside my book. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the whole class could hear. At recess, I stayed behind while the others ran outside. I slipped the note out again, ready to give it to Mrs. Carter, who sometimes came by the school. But just as I stood, I froze. Through the classroom window I saw him, Uncle James. Standing at the corner of the yard, his eyes locked on me. I stuffed the note back into my book and sat down quickly, pretending to tie my shoe. My chest heaved. He knew. Somehow he knew what I was doing. After recess, I couldn't concentrate. Every time the door creaked, I jumped. Every time a shadow moved outside the window, my stomach turned. When the final bell rang, I gathered my books with shaking hands, the folded note still hidden inside. I thought about slipping it into the teacher's desk, just leaving it behind and running. But as I walked to the front, I felt a chill. I didn't need to turn around. I could feel his eyes on me. He was waiting. So I tucked the note back into my pocket and walked out quietly. Uncle James was by the gate, smiling his fake smile. "Ready to head home, kiddo?" he asked, his voice smooth, too smooth. I nodded, my throat too tight to answer. We walked in silence down the road, the folded note burning against my leg. Every step felt heavier than the last. When we got home, my father was in the yard, repairing the fence again. Uncle James clapped him on the back, laughing like nothing was wrong. Then he glanced at me, his smile fading for just a moment, his eyes sharp and cold. And that's when I realized with horror. He had seen the note. The moment his eyes narrowed at me, my stomach dropped. Uncle James knew. I didn't know how, but he knew. Maybe he had seen me writing, or maybe he simply sensed my desperation. Either way, his smile told me everything. I was caught. I kept my hand tight in my pocket, feeling the folded note. The paper was soft from being crumpled, but to me it felt like a brick weighing me down. I couldn't let him take it. It was my only chance. "Go wash up for supper," my father said cheerfully, not noticing the tension hanging in the air. "James, keep an eye on the stew while I finish this fence." "Of course," Uncle James said smoothly. Then he glanced at me. "Sarah, why don't you come help me in the kitchen?" Every nerve in my body screamed to say no. But I nodded, because refusing him in front of my father would only make things worse. I followed him inside, my steps slow, my breath shallow. The kitchen smelled of onions and broth, but I barely noticed. Uncle James closed the door behind us and leaned against it, blocking the exit. "Where is it?" he whispered. His voice was low, almost calm, but I could hear the danger underneath. I froze, clutching my pocket. "Where's what?" He tilted his head, eyes sharp. "Don't play dumb with me, girl. You wrote something. A little note. Who was it for? Your daddy? The teacher?" He took a step closer. "Hand it over." My throat went dry. If I gave him the note, he would destroy it, and maybe destroy me too. But if I refused, he might find it anyway. My heart hammered against my ribs. "It was just homework," I stammered. "Math problems." His lip curled. "Math problems." He extended his hand, palm up. "Show me." Slowly, I pulled the paper from my pocket, my fingers trembling. But instead of giving it to him, I kept it half hidden in my fist. My mind raced. If I handed it over, everything would end here. "Give it," he demanded, his voice now sharp. Just then the back door creaked open. My father's voice called. "Is everything all right in there?" I seized the moment. I shoved the note deep into the cookbook on the counter between two thick pages and stepped forward. "Yes, Daddy," I shouted, my voice higher than usual. "We're just checking the stew." Uncle James's eyes widened in fury, but he plastered on a smile as my father stepped into the kitchen. "That's right," he said smoothly. "Sarah here was just helping me taste it. Needs a bit more salt." don't you think? My father nodded, completely unaware. Sounds good. Sarah, wash up now, supper's almost ready. I hurried past him, my hands shaking. The note was safe for now, hidden in the cookbook. But I knew Uncle James had seen exactly where I put it. Dinner that night was unbearable. My father chatted about the fence and the coming harvest, while Uncle James smiled and laughed like nothing was wrong. But every time his eyes met mine, I felt the silent warning. I know where it is. And if you don't move it, I'll take it. I barely swallowed my food. My stomach knotted with fear. After supper, my father went outside again to lock up the tools. Uncle James stood slowly from the table, stretching. I'll help you, brother, he called cheerfully. Then he turned to me, his smile sharp. Sarah, be a good girl and clean the dishes. As soon as they were out of sight, I ran to the cookbook. My hands fumbled through the pages, pulling it open to where I had stuffed the note. But the paper was gone. My heart stopped. He had taken it already. Somehow, before dinner, he had slipped it out. I sank to the floor, my chest tightening. It was over. He had won. That night, I lay awake, listening to the house creak. My mind replayed his voice. Hand it over. Where is it? I hugged my pillow and cried silently, praying for a miracle. Around midnight, I heard footsteps again. My door opened, and the faint glow of a lantern spilled in. Uncle James stepped inside, holding the crumpled note between his fingers. Did you think you could outsmart me? He whispered, his face twisted in anger. He waved the note slowly, then ripped it in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. This is what happens when you don't listen. I buried my face in the pillow, shaking. He leaned close to my ear. One more stunt like that, and I won't just tear paper. I'll tear apart everything you love. Do you understand? I nodded quickly, tears streaming down my cheeks. He straightened, slipped the lantern off, and left, shutting the door softly behind him. The silence after he left was deafening. My chest heaved as I stared at the torn pieces scattered on the floor. My plan was ruined, but something inside me had shifted. He thought ripping the note would break me, but instead, it lit a fire in me. If he wanted me to stay quiet, I would find another way to be loud. The next morning, I gathered the scraps of paper and hid them under my pillow. They were useless now, but they reminded me of something important. I was stronger than he thought. At school, I tried again. This time, I didn't write a note. Instead, I practiced the words in my head. Help me. Uncle James has a gun. Please believe me. I would say them out loud, even if my voice shook. But when I looked out the window during reading time, my stomach dropped. There he was again. Uncle James, standing just beyond the schoolyard, arms folded, watching me like a hawk. And worse, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood another man I had never seen before. Tall, thin, with a scar running down his cheek. The man looked at the school, then at me, and smiled. My blood froze. The moment I saw the man with the scar, my heart sank into my stomach. He wasn't just a stranger. He looked dangerous, like someone who didn't belong near a schoolyard. The way his eyes scanned the building, slow and deliberate, made my skin crawl. Uncle James leaned close to him, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then the man laughed softly and nodded. My hands gripped the edge of my desk so hard they hurt. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the teacher right then and there. But my voice locked in my throat. What if Uncle James was testing me? What if this man was part of his plan? The bell rang and the other kids rushed out for recess. I stayed seated, frozen, praying the teacher wouldn't notice. But she did. Sarah, aren't you going outside? I forced a smile. I'll just read today. She nodded and left with the others. I was alone. Carefully, I stood and peeked out the window again. Uncle James was gone. Only the scarred man remained, leaning against the fence with his arms crossed. He looked straight at me through the glass and his grin widened. I stumbled back, my breath shallow. Why was he here? What did Uncle James tell him? The door creaked behind me. I spun around, my heart racing. But it wasn't Uncle James. It was Mrs. Carter holding a basket of apples. Sarah, dear, she said warmly, setting the basket down. You look like you've seen a ghost. I hesitated, words building in my throat. This was my chance. I could tell her everything. She would believe me. I opened my mouth. Mrs. Carter. But then I caught sight of the scarred man through the window again. He was pointing at the school, tapping the glass, his grin never fading. I froze. If I said something now, he'd know. And Uncle James would find out. Sarah. Mrs. Carter tilted her head, concern in her eyes. What is it, child? I shook my head quickly. And nothing. Just tired. She studied me for a moment, then sighed. All right. But don't forget. You can always talk to me. She patted my shoulder and left. The rest of the day blurred. I couldn't focus on reading or spelling. All I could think about was that scarred man and the secret conversation he'd had with Uncle James. By the time the bell rang, my stomach was in knots. I walked slowly out of the school, clutching my books. And there he was, Uncle James, waiting by the gate with the scarred man beside him. Here she is, Uncle James said smoothly, putting a hand on my shoulder. This is my niece, Sarah. The scarred man's grin stretched wider. He bent down slightly, his eyes locking on mine. Nice to meet you, little girl, he said, his voice rough like gravel. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But my legs wouldn't move. And then Uncle James said the words that made my blood turn to ice. She's the one I told you about. She's the one I told you about. The words echoed in my ears, louder than the school bell had ever been. My body froze under Uncle James's grip. The scarred man's grin stretched wider, like he had just found something valuable. I stared at him, my mind spinning. What did Uncle James tell him? What did he want with me? The man crouched slightly so his scarred face was level with mine. His breath smelled of smoke and something sour. She looks smart, he rasped. And scared. Uncle James chuckled. She's obedient too. Aren't you, Sarah? His fingers dug into my shoulder, a silent warning. I forced myself to nod, though every fiber of me wanted to run. The scarred man patted my head, his hand rough and heavy. Good girl. Obedient girls live longer. My stomach twisted. I clutched my books tighter, praying my father would appear on the road, but he didn't. It was just the three of us, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dirt. Uncle James straightened. We should get going. Come on, Sarah. I hesitated, glancing toward the school as if I might dart back inside. But the scarred man stepped slightly in front of me, blocking the path. His grin faded into something colder. Don't make me chase you. My knees nearly buckled. I followed Uncle James down the road, the scarred man trailing behind us. Each step felt heavier, like I was sinking into the earth. When we reached home, my father was still outside, hammering at the fence. He smiled when he saw us. Who's this? Uncle James waved casually. An old friend of mine. Stopped by to catch up. The scarred man lifted a hand in greeting. Name's Carl. His voice was smooth now, polite, nothing like the rough rasp he had used with me. My father nodded, trusting as always. Good to meet you. You're welcome to stay for supper. Appreciate it, Carl said with a smile. My father returned to his work, humming. He had no idea what kind of man was standing in our yard. Inside the house, Carl made himself comfortable at the table, his eyes following me as I set out plates. Uncle James leaned against the counter, arms folded. So, Carl said slowly, this is the house. Quiet place. No neighbors too close. Convenient. Convenient for what? My hand shook as I set down the spoons. I wanted to scream the truth to my father outside, but the weight of Uncle James's stare pinned me down. Uncle James smirked. Told you she'd be perfect. Carl's grin returned. Oh, I believe you. He leaned closer to me, lowering his voice. You keep secrets well, don't you, little girl? I nodded quickly, unable to meet his eyes. Good, he said. Because secrets can keep you alive. That night, supper felt like poison. My father talked about the harvest again, while Uncle James and Carl exchanged looks over the table. I barely touched my food. Every time Carl's scarred face turned toward me, my stomach tightened. After supper, my father went to bed early, leaving me alone with them. Uncle James lit a cigarette while Carl leaned back in his chair, watching me. She's quiet, Carl said. I like that. Uncle James blew out smoke. She doesn't have a choice. Carl chuckled. Keep her that way. We'll need her. My blood ran cold. Need me for what? I excused myself quickly and went to my room, closing the door. But I couldn't sleep. I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to hear their voices in the kitchen. Money coming soon, Carl was saying. But we can't risk her talking. She won't, Uncle James replied. I've made sure of it. Carl's laugh was low and cruel. You'd better. Because if she does, you know what happens. My chest heaved as I backed away from the wall. They were planning something. Something big. And I was at the center of it. The next day Carl was still there. He followed Uncle James around the house, helping with chores, but his eyes never stopped flicking toward me. I tried to avoid him, keeping close to my father whenever possible. But Uncle James made sure I was never too far from their reach. That afternoon I slipped outside to feed the chickens. The yard was quiet, the sun warm on my back. For a moment I almost felt free. Then a shadow fell across the ground. I turned, and Carl was standing behind me. Pretty little place you've got here, he said, his scar stretching as he smiled. Shame if anything happened to it. My throat went dry. What do you want? He crouched, his face close to mine. Want? I don't want anything from you yet. But your uncle? He says you're loyal. He says you'll do as you're told. So prove him right. Stay quiet. Don't make trouble. I nodded quickly, my hand shaking. Carl leaned closer, whispering so low I barely heard him. Because if you don't, I'll make sure your father pays the price. Then he straightened and walked away, whistling like nothing had happened. I sank to the ground, tears stinging my eyes. It wasn't just Uncle James anymore. Now Carl was part of it. And they were planning something I couldn't understand, but I knew it was dangerous. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I overheard them again. Train comes through Friday, Carl said. If we get the timing right, it's easy money. Perfect, Uncle James replied. And the girl stays out of it. She's too valuable as insurance. Insurance. That word struck me like a blow. I wasn't just their prisoner. I was their shield. I stumbled back from the doorway, my breath catching. The floorboard creaked beneath my foot. Both men turned their heads, and Uncle James's eyes locked straight on me. The floorboard creaked under my foot, loud as thunder in the silence. Uncle James's head snapped toward me. His eyes narrowed, his face hardening like stone. What are you doing there, Sarah? His voice was calm, too calm. I froze in the hallway, my lips trembling. I was just getting some water. Carl leaned back in his chair, smirking. Funny place to stand if you're thirsty. Looks more like you were listening. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. No, I wasn't. I swear. Uncle James stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He crossed the room, each step heavy, until he was right in front of me. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. You heard something, didn't you? His voice was low, dangerous. Tears pricked my eyes. No, I didn't. Carl laughed softly. She's lying. Look at her hands, they're shaking. Uncle James grabbed my wrist, squeezing until I winced. What did you hear, Sarah? Tell me the truth. I shook my head desperately. Just that you were talking about the train. The words slipped out before I could stop them. His eyes darkened. Carl's grin widened. Well, Carl said. She's sharper than I thought. Uncle James's grip tightened. You don't repeat a word of this. Do you understand? Not to your father, not to anyone. I nodded quickly, choking back a sob. Carl stood, his scar catching the light. Maybe we should keep her close, just in case. Don't want her wandering around with open ears. Uncle James hesitated, then nodded. You're right. From now on, she doesn't leave my sight. My stomach twisted. No school, no neighbors, no freedom. Just them, watching me every second. Carl leaned close, his voice a whisper meant only for me. If you breathe one word, little girl, you'll find out what happens to snitches. He traced the scar on his cheek with one finger, grinning. This wasn't from an accident. It was a lesson. I swallowed hard, my knees trembling. Uncle James yanked me back toward my room. Go to bed, he growled. And remember, your silence keeps your daddy alive. He shoved me inside and slammed the door. I collapsed on the bed, my chest heaving. tears spilling onto the pillow. The walls felt like they were closing in. But as I stared at the moonlight spilling through the window, a thought struck me. They wanted me silent because they were afraid. Afraid I could ruin everything. And if they were afraid, maybe I still had power. I wiped my eyes, sat up, and whispered to myself, I have to find a way to speak. Before Friday. Before the train. That was when I heard it, soft, deliberate scratching at the window. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head. A face was peering in from the darkness. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. The face at the window looked pale in the moonlight, ghostly against the glass. My chest tightened, my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come out. Then the figure lifted a hand and tapped gently on the pane. I scrambled back across the bed, pressing myself against the wall. My heart hammered so loud I thought it would wake the whole house. Slowly, the face leaned closer and I realized it wasn't Uncle James. It wasn't Carl. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 16, a little older than me. His hair was messy, his clothes ragged, and dirt streaked his cheek. But his eyes, they weren't cruel like Carl's or sharp like Uncle James's. They looked desperate. Please, he whispered through the glass, his voice muffled but urgent. Don't scream. I hesitated, my body shaking. Who are you? I whispered back. My name's Daniel, he said quickly. I need your help. I blinked in confusion. My help? Yes. He glanced over his shoulder, as if afraid of being seen. Your uncle, he's not who you think he is. He and that man, they're planning something. Something bad. My blood ran cold. I know, I whispered. Daniel's eyes widened. You do? I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. They said something about a train. And money. And they said I was insurance. He cursed softly under his breath. I knew it. I've been following them for weeks. They've been hiding out here because they're planning to rob that train Friday night. But it's not just a robbery. If anyone gets in their way, they'll kill. The words hit me like a blow. My knees went weak. Kill. Daniel's face was grim. They've done it before. For a moment, the world spun. I thought of my father, sleeping peacefully in the next room, unaware of the monsters living under his roof. I thought of Mrs. Carter, who had smiled kindly at me just days ago. And now this boy at my window, whispering truths I was too afraid to face. What can I do? I asked, my voice trembling. Daniel leaned closer. We have to tell someone before Friday. The sheriff, maybe. Or anyone who can stop them. I tried. I whispered, clutching my pillow. I wrote a note, but my uncle found it. He tore it up. If I say anything, he'll hurt my father. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's why we have to be smart. You can't do it alone. But maybe together. A floorboard creaked outside my room. My stomach dropped. Daniel froze, his eyes wide. The door handle rattled. Sarah? Uncle James's voice, low and suspicious, seeped through the wood. Who are you talking to? Panic surged through me. Daniel motioned for me to stay quiet. He ducked beneath the window, disappearing into the shadows. I scrambled to the door, my hands shaking. And no one. Just talking to myself. The handle rattled again. Then silence. For a long moment, I thought he would barge in. But finally, footsteps retreated down the hall. I sank onto the bed, gasping for air. Slowly, Daniel's face reappeared at the window. That was close, he whispered. Tears streamed down my cheeks. You have to go. If he sees you. I know, he said. But I'll be back tomorrow night. Be ready. We don't have much time. Before I could answer, he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. That night I barely slept. My mind raced with questions. Who was Daniel really? Could I trust him? Or was this some new trick? Another layer of Uncle James's trap? The next day dragged on like a nightmare. Uncle James and Carl whispered constantly, sometimes looking at me, sometimes glancing out the window like they expected someone. My father worked as usual, humming, oblivious. By afternoon, Carl disappeared into town, leaving me alone with Uncle James. His eyes followed me as I swept the floor, as I cooked supper, as I carried water from the pump. Finally he spoke. You've been quiet lately, he said, his tone light but edged. I forced a smile. Just tired. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. Tired, or hiding something? My hands tightened on the broom. Nothing, I whispered. He studied me for a long moment, then smirked. Good. Keep it that way. That evening, Carl returned with a black satchel. I caught a glimpse of metal inside. Guns. My stomach lurched. The plan was real. Friday wasn't far away. When night finally came, I lay in bed staring at the window. My heart pounded with every creak of the house. Would Daniel come back? Or had he been caught? Then, top. I rushed to the window, pulling it open quietly. Daniel climbed inside this time, landing softly on the floor. You're crazy, I whispered. If he finds you. He won't, Daniel cut in. I made sure. They're both asleep. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. This is proof. I found it in town. They've been seen with wanted posters before. Robbery, murder, all of it. The sheriff knows their faces. He handed me the paper. My hand shook as I read the names. James Miller and Carl Briggs. My uncle's name. Right there in black and white. Tears blurred my vision. So it's true. He's a criminal. Daniel nodded. And if we don't act now, more people will die. We have to get this to the sheriff. Tomorrow. A sound outside made us both freeze. The crunch of footsteps in the dirt. Daniel's face went pale. He pressed a finger to his lips, then motioned for me to hide the paper. I shoved it under my mattress just as the door burst open. Uncle James stood there, his eyes blazing, a lantern in one hand. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on me, then shifting. And then his eyes stopped on Daniel. Uncle James's lantern threw harsh light across the room, chasing away every shadow. His eyes narrowed as they fixed on Daniel. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Well, Uncle James said slowly, his voice calm but dripping with danger. What do we have here? Daniel straightened, trying to look braver than he was. Leave her alone, James. I know what you've done. Uncle James chuckled darkly. Big words for a boy sneaking through windows. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The latch clicked shut, sealing us in. I shrank back against the wall, my heart pounding. Daniel's jaw tightened. You and Carl, you're planning to rob the train Friday. The sheriff's going to find out. For the first time, Uncle James's smirk faltered. His eyes flicked toward me. You told him. I shook my head frantically. No, I didn't. He found out on his own. Daniel stepped forward. Doesn't matter how I know. What matters is this ends now. You're not hurting her. Or anyone else. Uncle James's face hardened. You think you can stop me, boy? He set the lantern on the table and reached into his coat. My breath caught when he pulled out a knife, the blade gleaming in the light. Run, he told Daniel softly. If you value your life, run. Daniel didn't move. His fists clenched at his sides, but I saw the fear in his eyes. Please, I begged, stepping between them. Don't. He hasn't done anything. Move, Sarah, Uncle James barked. His voice was sharp, cutting through me like glass. I stood frozen, torn between them. Daniel took a step closer, his voice steady now. You won't touch her again. I'll make sure of it. Uncle James laughed bitterly. You're just a boy. And boys bleed like anyone else. Then he lunged. The knife flashed, slicing the air. Daniel dodged, grabbing a chair and shoving it between them. The wood cracked as the blade struck, splinters flying. Run, Sarah, Daniel shouted. But my legs wouldn't move. My body trembled, glued to the floor as the fight raged inches away. Uncle James shoved the chair aside and swung again. Daniel caught his wrist, struggling, both of them grunting as they fought for control of the blade. Get out! Daniel yelled. Find your father. The words broke through my paralysis. I turned toward the door, fumbling at the latch with shaking hands. But before I could open it, Uncle James slammed Daniel against the wall, the knife pressing closer to his throat. Daniel's face twisted in pain. Go, he gasped. I screamed, my hand still on the latch. But before I could pull it open, footsteps thundered down the hall. The door burst wide. And Carl stood there, gun in hand, his scar twisting into a cruel smile. Carl filled the doorway. his shadow stretching long into the room. The lantern light caught the scar running down his cheek, twisting his grin into something monstrous. He raised the gun slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "Well, isn't this a sweet picture?" he drawled. "Our little bird found herself a friend." Uncle James's grip tightened on Daniel's throat, the knife pressing closer. "He snuck in through the window," he growled. "Been snooping." Carl chuckled. "And here I thought you had her under control." "I did," Uncle James snapped. He came to her. Daniel struggled, his voice hoarse. "You're both going down. The sheriff knows." Carl cut him off with a laugh. "The sheriff knows nothing, boy. And by the time he does, that train will be ours and you'll be a memory." The barrel of the gun shifted, pointing straight at Daniel's chest. My breath caught. "No," I screamed, throwing myself forward. "Please don't hurt him." Carl's eyes slid toward me, cold and amused. "Ah, so you care about him." He stepped into the room, closing the door with a soft click. "That makes things interesting." Uncle James sneered. "She's been playing innocent. Can't trust a girl with secrets." Carl tilted his head, still staring at me. "Maybe not. But fear keeps people loyal." He raised the gun higher. "Watch, Sarah. Watch closely. This is what happens when people stick their noses where they don't belong." Time slowed. The world narrowed to the dark circle of the gun barrel. Daniel's face was pale, but his eyes blazed with defiance. He didn't look at Carl. He looked at me. "Don't let them win," he whispered. Carl's finger tightened on the trigger. Something inside me snapped. Without thinking, I hurled myself at the table. The lantern toppled, crashing to the floor. The flame inside shattered, sparks leaping across the boards. Smoke billowed instantly. Carl cursed, jerking back. The gun fired, bang. The sound deafening. Splinters flew from the wall inches from Daniel's head. Daniel twisted, shoving Uncle James off him. The knife clattered to the floor. In the chaos I grabbed it, clutching the handle so hard my knuckles ached. "Run!" Daniel shouted again, but this time I didn't move. My hand shook, but I held the knife out, pointing it at Carl. "Stay back!" I cried, my voice breaking. Carl's laughter cut through the smoke. "Oh, this is rich. The little bird thinks she's grown claws." Uncle James lunged for me, but Daniel tackled him, the two of them crashing into the bed. The room exploded with sound, shouts, the scrape of boots, the crackle of fire where the lantern oil had spread. Carl raised the gun again, aiming for Daniel. And I didn't think, I just acted. I slashed the knife wildly, not at Carl but at the curtains. The fabric tore and flames caught instantly, leaping upward. The fire roared to life, spreading across the wall. Smoke filled my lungs. "We have to get out," I screamed. Carl cursed, stepping back. "You idiot! You'll burn us all." Daniel shoved Uncle James off him and staggered toward me, grabbing my hand. "Come on." We lunged for the window, coughing, blinded by smoke. I climbed onto the sill, but Carl's voice thundered through the haze. "Not so fast." I turned and saw the gun aimed at Daniel's back. "Daniel!" I screamed. The shot rang out, bang. Daniel jerked, his eyes widening in shock. For a split second, silence. Then his body crumpled to the floor. "No!" My scream tore through the smoke as I dropped to my knees beside him. Blood spread across his shirt, warm against my trembling hands. His lips moved, faint, struggling for words. Uncle James staggered to his feet, coughing, eyes blazing with fury. "Carl, you fool!" "The house!" But I barely heard them. My world had shrunk to Daniel's pale face, his breath shallow, his fingers clutching mine weakly. "You have to," he gasped. "Stop them, don't let them." His words faded, his eyes fluttering shut. The flames roared higher, swallowing the room. Carl grabbed Uncle James by the arm. "Forget the boy. Grab the girl. She's still insurance." Through the smoke and fire, Uncle James's shadow loomed toward me. His hand reached out, closing the distance. I clutched Daniel's hand one last time, then forced myself to my feet, choking on smoke. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body froze, trapped between the fire at my back and the monsters in front of me. Carl's voice cut through the chaos, low and deadly. "You're not going anywhere, little bird." And then the flames swallowed the ceiling above us with a deafening crash. The ceiling groaned and split, flames racing along the beams. Smoke poured into my lungs, making me cough so hard my chest ached. The heat pressed in from every side, but Uncle James and Carl still came closer, their shadows flickering in the firelight. "Grab her," Carl barked, his gun waving wildly. "Before the whole place comes down." Uncle James lunged, his hand clamping around my wrist. His skin was hot and slick with sweat. I screamed, twisting, the knife still clutched in my other hand. "Let me go," I cried. The fire roared, sparks raining down. Daniel's body lay motionless on the floor, his pale face a haunting reminder of what they had already done. My heart shattered, but his last words echoed in my head. "Don't let them win." Something inside me hardened. With every ounce of strength I had left, I drove the knife down, not into Uncle James but into his arm. He howled, releasing me instantly. I stumbled backward, choking on smoke. The flames surged between us, cutting him off. His face twisted with rage as he shouted, "Sarah, you'll regret this." Carl cursed, dragging him toward the door. "Leave her. The fire will finish her." And then they were gone, swallowed by the smoke. The walls groaned, timbers cracking. I staggered to the window, coughing, my vision swimming. With shaking hands, I shoved it open and climbed onto the sill. The night air rushed over me, cool and sharp. Behind me, the roof collapsed with a deafening crash, sparks exploding into the sky. I tumbled out, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through my side, but I scrambled to my feet and ran, tears blinding me. Neighbors would come when they saw the flames, I knew. My father would return, horrified to find our home in ashes. And Uncle James and Carl, they were still out there. But I had survived. And with the paper Daniel gave me, hidden under the mattress before the fire spread, the sheriff would know everything. As I stood there, staring at the blaze consuming the house, I realized the truth. Silence had almost killed me. Keeping secrets had given my uncle the power to destroy lives. But now I understood. Evil grows in the dark, but it shrinks in the light. I would speak. I would tell everything. For Daniel. For myself. For every child who thought they had to stay quiet. So if you're watching this, remember, never let fear lock your voice. Speak even if it shakes. Speak because your words might save a life. My name is Sarah. I'm from a small town in the United States, and this was my story. If you followed me this far, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the notification button so you won't miss more stories like this. And tell me, what part of the country are you watching from? Because every story matters. And so does yours.